Have you ever heard anyone say that church should stay out of politics? The church has no business in politics. And you'd even usually hear them say something like separation of church and state. And they usually misquote it or use it to say, hey, listen, Christians, you shouldn't be talking about political things and you shouldn't be bringing your faith into governmental things. I've even heard testimonies of people that have put up a cross or some form of faith symbol at a government and place of employment, and they've been asked to take it down because of separation of church and state. They're like, hey, this is a government paid area. You can't have religious symbols here. And it is actually very common for people to not know the truth about what the Constitution actually says about separation of church and state. Because if we're going to be this adamant about it, be this maybe intense about making sure the church stays in one area and the state stays in another area, then we need to know what the Constitution actually says about it. It says absolutely nothing, because, and watch this whole video, I'm going to break out to you how we got here and what it looks like. The Constitution does not actually say that there's a separation of church and state. That comment, that quote, this idea was made by Thomas Jefferson. It was written in a letter by Thomas Jefferson in 1802, talking about a wall of separation that he would want, that there needs to be between the church and the state. Well, you'd ask yourself, what do we need the wall of separation for? And he brings up some actually really good points. He brings up protecting the church from the corruption inside the government. And he also brings up protecting the government from the corruption that's in the church. But what does the Constitution actually say? The First Amendment begins, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that's what it says. That is our freedom of religion, that Congress will make no law pretty much making an honoring of a religion or restricting thereof. So what it's saying is the government cannot form a religion. The government cannot have an actual religion itself. The United States government is not Catholic or Jewish or non-denominational or Muslim or Hindu. The government needs to be neutral. It cannot have a religion of its own. Also, the government cannot stop you from freely practicing your personal faith, that it cannot inhibit you from practicing your personal beliefs, as long as those beliefs are within the law of the land and the law of what your area, your community, your city, your state has and says. The government can't restrict you from practicing your personal faith. So what type of standard do we use to find out how in the process of separating the church and state? Well, an old standard used to be called the Lemon Test. And the Lemon Test would look at the involvement of the state and the church together and see what level they're actually operating in. And if it crossed a certain line, then they would wind up saying, hey, listen, we can't do this. Because remember, the founding fathers wanted the state to be neutral outside of any type of religious organization. So the first standard would be that they would have to have a law that is legitimately a law outside of a faith in origin. So it has to help the secular need. It has to still have a secular tie-in. It has to be able to help the community, help America outside of the church's desires, goals, beliefs, regardless of what faith that church is. It must have a legitimate, non-religious purpose. Also, it cannot benefit or hinder a church or faith. So, for instance, the law or whatever the government is trying to partner with a people of faith with, it cannot boost up that faith or maybe let's say like sponsor it or make it the flagship or the primary. It cannot be fully advantageous to the church. So, for instance, we have a food pantry at my church. The government can allow us to be tax exempt and give us benefits because, like we talked about in the first rule, that helps benefit society. But what they can't do is come in and buy $10,000 worth of production gear for us. You see, that doesn't benefit society. That doesn't benefit the community. So there are restrictions there that would fail government, the Lemon Test of the government using resources for separation of church and state, or at least the idea, because remember, this is not in the Constitution. Let's take a look at the next one now. It cannot endorse exclusive entanglement. And that means, so for instance, the government can pay for public school teachers, okay? But the government does not need to pay for private faith-based schools, okay? They don't need to. They can give them tax breaks. They can do whatever is set up through the IRS. But there's an entanglement there now. That means the two would become a business partner for that franchise or company. And we want to keep the government separate from that. There was once a case where a football coach, Joseph Kennedy, would kneel at the 50-yard line and would pray during his football games. It's a high school football coach, public football, and he was asked to stop, or a public school team, and he was asked to stop. He refused to stop, and he continued to kneel and pray at the 50-yard line. Well, this case would go all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would rule in favor that Joseph Kennedy could continue to kneel and pray, because that was his own personal right, his own personal belief and expression. He was not mandating that anybody else do it. He was doing it on a personal matter. It did not matter that he was in his public school shirt at a public school event. The thing that mattered was that you could not force anybody else due to your scheduling or your authority to participate in your faith with you. It was a 6-3 vote from the Supreme Court to say he won. So he won that. So now we actually have a standard that as long as you are not mandating this onto another American, you actually can practice what you believe. Once again, I want to point out, still never are pulpits to be silent. Is there anything to be said about, hey, can you or can you not say this in America? Is this acceptable for churches today, and preachers need to be quiet at the platform? All right. So now here it is, straight up. This is what the IRS says, because in all honesty, that's probably what's most important and definitely who everybody's most afraid of. Not more important than God. Just want to clarify that. But the IRS actually says that if churches want to stay tax exempt, which most of them do, and they should be, by the way, then they cannot endorse a political person. So if someone's running for the campaign, they cannot endorse them. They cannot endorse a political candidate on the campaign trail. They cannot do that. But what pastors and preachers can do is they can say the biblical values that we believe and what it looks like for legislation that is on its way. So that if there is a legislation that goes against our political beliefs, that the pastor or preacher, spiritual leader can then say, hey, vote no against this. Or here is a website, here is a documentation that shows what is coming up on the ballots and the Bible concepts that we believe. That is all perfectly fine. They cannot endorse somebody though. But if they're going to speak in against an agenda item or something that's going to be passed, they need to say it from the perspective, the legislation's perspective, tied into the faith belief. There has to be a faith tie in there. So for instance, they need to say, hey, listen, we don't want the legalization of killing harmless animals. Why? Because we believe we've been given dominion over the earth and that we need to take care of it. That is acceptable. They cannot say, hey, vote for John Smith for state representative. We can't do that. They can't do that. They shouldn't do that. But you might be asking yourself then, well, what does the Bible say about this? And I'm with you. And the Bible is definitely, I would say, all over radar because it did not have a democracy like America. But that doesn't mean it doesn't speak truth. First and foremost, we are to honor the king, the law of the land that we live in. All right. So we need to honor voting. We need to honor the lawmakers and the process that we have in place. We need to know that the prophets in the Old Testament were given to speak truth, speak truth to the king, speak truth to Israel. And as believers, we need to be speaking truth in our time, in our nation, saying what our biblical values are. That is our role. We are now, a holy nation, priests of a royal priesthood. So it's our job to take care of the future of our country and stand for our political beliefs and be like, hey, our political beliefs are our biblical beliefs. And we need to vote them hand in hand. We need to live them hand in hand. And we need to not be silent because the Bible is very clear. I love what Proverbs 31 says, verse 8 and 9. Open your mouth for the speechless in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and the needy. And if we look at Acts 5:29, we ought to obey God rather than not. So we need to have a voice. We need to have a voice for the unborn. We need to have the voice for the needy out there. We need to have a voice for the oppressed. And we are to obey God above anything and everything else. So yes, your pastor and you can talk about your biblical faith-based beliefs on government property, and from the pulpit. You can go where you want and pretty much say as you want as a free American citizen. You just can't use your power or authority at work to then mandate that somebody do your faith-based sacramental event, be it prayer, be it a Bible study, be it communion. And also, your pastor cannot endorse a political representative, but he can speak the biblical truth and how it pertains to the ballot. So as believers, we need to get out there. We need to declare the word of God. We need to let this world know that Jesus lives. We need to carry it out in love, and we need to vote our biblical values. All right, guys, if you like that video, hit the like and subscribe. You know the deal. Comment down below if you got any questions. I'd love to see you guys in the next video. I'd love to hear any other videos you'd like me to make or unpack. Any questions you have about Christianity, American faith, how we walk out as Americans and as Christians as well. But man, love you guys. Catch you in the next video.